My name is Margaret Hale, and on Christmas Eve, at 71 years old, I learned what it feels like to be pushed out of your own family. I wasn't expecting warmth or celebration when I arrived at my son Daniel's home, but I never imagined I would end the night standing on his front porch with the door slamming behind me. The house still smelled like cinnamon and roasted turkey when Melissa's voice cut through the living room. "Your mom is going to ruin our Christmas." "Daniel, she always does." I stood there holding the casserole I'd made, trying to pretend her words didn't land where they always did, right in the softest part of me. I had spent all afternoon cooking that dish, hoping this year things would be different. Maybe Melissa would smile. Maybe the kids would hug me longer than 2 seconds. Maybe Daniel would put his arm around my shoulder the way he used to. Instead, I watched Melissa shove her hands onto her hips, her eyes sharp with a resentment I still didn't understand. Daniel tried to calm her, but he did it the way someone tries to quiet a storm they've already surrendered to. "Mel, it's one night. She's fine. She's my mom." Melissa didn't back down. She pointed straight at the door. "If she stays, I'm leaving, I swear to God. I'm taking the kids and going to my sister's. Choose." And Daniel, my only child, stared at the floor. He didn't choose me. He didn't choose her. He chose silence. And in that silence, everything inside me cracked. When he finally looked up, his voice trembled. "Mom, maybe it's better if you go home tonight. Just for tonight?" The cold air rushed in as the door opened behind me. Melissa nudged my bag forward with her foot, impatience dripping from every movement. I stepped out before she had to ask again. The door clicked shut. Snow collected on my sleeves, and I realized, standing alone in the freezing dark with no ride, no plan, and no real home waiting for me, that this was the moment my life would split in two. The part before this night, and everything that would come after. When I came to, the first thing I felt was heat, a heavy, artificial warmth pressing against my skin, nothing like the kind that comes from sunlight or a blanket pulled up by someone who cares. My eyelids fluttered open to a harsh white ceiling and the rhythmic beep of a monitor beside me. It took a few seconds before the blur sharpened enough for me to understand I was in a hospital. My throat felt dry, my lips cracked, and I could taste the metallic sting of fear at the back of my mouth. A nurse stepped into view, her voice gentle but brisk, the way people speak when they've already said the same lines 100 times. "Mrs. Hale, can you hear me?" I nodded weakly. She asked how I felt, but the truth was too tangled for words, cold, ashamed, overwhelmed, and strangely detached from my own body. She explained I'd been brought in with hypothermia symptoms after someone found me collapsed outside St. Mary's Church. I tried to imagine how I looked sprawled in the snow like that, an old woman left behind by the holiday joy inside other people's homes. She told me a woman named Joanne had seen me from across the parking lot and called 911. I didn't know who Joanne was, but for a brief moment, the kindness of a stranger felt stronger than all the hurt I had gathered from people I loved. Later that morning, a doctor informed me I could be discharged once my temperature stabilized. "Do you have someone who can pick you up?" he asked casually, as if the answer should have been obvious. I stared at my phone resting on the bedside table. Daniel's name was right there in my recent calls, glowing like a bruise. All I had to do was tap it, but I imagined the look on his face if I interrupted his Christmas after the scene Melissa made. I imagined him choosing silence again, and the humiliation of that felt heavier than the cold had been. "I'll call a cab," I said quietly. The nurse offered me a cup of warm tea before I left. I sipped it slowly, letting the heat calm the shaking inside my chest. When the cab arrived, the driver barely glanced at me. The hum of the heater and the soft sound of the tires on slush were the only company I had as we drove through a city covered in twinkling lights and cheerful displays. My reflection in the window looked like a ghost drifting through other people's Christmases. By the time we reached my apartment, the last of my cash was gone. I climbed the steps carefully, still feeling unsteady, and fished for my keys. That's when I noticed the paper taped to my door, a stark white sheet against the faded paint, fluttering slightly with the draft from the hallway heater. I knew what it was before I even touched it. Pay or quit notice. The words punched the breath out of me. I read it once, then again, hoping some detail had changed on the second pass. It hadn't. I was 2 months behind on rent. I had 10 days to pay the balance or vacate. No exceptions. Inside my apartment, the silence was even colder than the hospital room. I sank onto the bed without removing my coat. The space around me felt smaller than ever, as if the walls were closing in with every unpaid bill and every memory I didn't want to revisit. I closed my eyes and pictured Daniel as he was when he was little, always reaching for my hand, always checking if I was close behind him. I wondered when, exactly, he had stopped seeing me, when he started letting Melissa's resentment drown out the sound of my voice, when I became someone who could be pushed into the snow without a second thought. My phone buzzed on the nightstand. I grabbed it quickly, foolishly hoping it was Daniel asking if I was all right, or maybe even apologizing. But it was just a text. Merry Christmas. Mom. We're busy today. Talk later. That was all. No question about why I hadn't returned. No concern about the weather or my health. No sign he even remembered how the night before had ended. I stared at the message until the words blurred. I thought about calling him, telling him what happened, begging him for help. But the image of him choosing Melissa's comfort over my safety played over and over in my mind. I couldn't bear to hear that silence again. I placed the phone face down and pulled the blanket over myself, still wrapped in my coat. The room was dark except for the faint streetlight glowing through the blinds. I listened to the radiator sputter weakly in the corner, struggling to warm a space that no longer felt like mine. Sleep came in fragments, interrupted by shivers and the echo of Melissa's voice telling Daniel to choose. I kept waking up with the same hollow realization settling deeper each time. The place I had called home for years was slipping out from under me, and I had no one, absolutely no one, to steady me as I fell. The 10 days on the notice slipped by faster than I wanted them to. Every morning I woke hoping something would change, that a miracle would nudge my life back into place. But miracles don't visit people who can't pay their rent. By the time the deadline arrived, I found myself standing inside the leasing office with a stack of papers in my trembling hands, waiting for someone to confirm the truth I already knew. Kyle, the young property manager, met me with a kind but practiced expression, the kind people wear when they've had to deliver the same bad news too many times. He gestured for me to sit, though I barely felt the chair beneath me. As he spoke about balances and deadlines and court filings, his voice blended into the humming of the old fluorescent lights above us. I nodded politely, even though it felt like every nod chipped away another piece of the life I thought I'd built for myself. When I walked out of that office, the cold air didn't sting the way it had on Christmas Eve. Instead, it felt honest, almost refreshing in its bluntness. I had run out of time. Pretending otherwise wouldn't save me. Back in my apartment, I began packing. It happened slowly at first, like my body was protesting the idea of giving up the space that had held my husband's laughter and my quiet routines. But eventually, my hands took over. I folded sweaters and placed them gently into the suitcase. I wrapped my husband's old watch in a scarf and tucked it into a corner as if the fabric could protect the memories attached to it. At the bottom of a drawer, I found a small photo of Daniel at 6 years old, missing a front tooth and smiling with a joy I hadn't seen in decades. My fingers brushed the edges before I slipped it into my purse. When everything was packed, I stood in the empty apartment, staring at the bare walls that had once held the picture frames I couldn't afford to rehang. I turned off the lights one final time and handed the keys to the building superintendent, who offered me a sympathetic half-smile that made me want to disappear. The bus ride to the motel was quiet. I watched familiar streets blur into unfamiliar ones, the city lights glowing like tiny reminders of other people's comfort. When the driver announced my stop, I stepped off and faced the building I had only ever walked past. Lakeview Budget Inn. The neon sign flickered as if deciding whether to bother staying lit. A buzzing sound followed each flicker, echoing in the cold air. I dragged my bags through the parking lot, past a couple arguing near a rusted car and a woman smoking outside her room with a blanket wrapped around her shoulders. Inside the lobby, the air smelled faintly of stale coffee and cleaning chemicals. The man behind the counter barely glanced at me. I paid for a week up front, watching nearly all the remaining balance in my account vanish in a single transaction. He handed me a key card without a word. My room was at the far end of the second floor, the kind of room you enter hoping you won't need to touch the walls. The carpet felt damp under my shoes. The heater rattled so loudly it sounded like it might shake itself loose. A small table wobbled when I set my bag on it. Still, it was a roof over my head, and that alone felt like something I couldn't afford to judge. The first morning there, I tried buying a cup of coffee from the vending machine near the lobby. I fed my last few coins into the slot and waited. The machine groaned, flickered, then swallowed my money with a sort of mechanical indifference that felt almost personal. No coffee, no coins returned. I stared at the machine for a moment, then laughed, a short broken sound that startled me with its bitterness. It dissolved into silence before I could stop it. The days that followed slipped into a strange routine. I would walk to the diner down the street, order the cheapest breakfast on the menu, and stretch it as long as possible so I wouldn't have to return to the room too soon. Sometimes I watched families eat together, talking over plates of pancakes, and I felt like a ghost drifting through a world I used to be part of. Every night I checked my phone, hoping for a message from Daniel. Nothing arrived. I didn't send anything either. I didn't trust myself not to apologize for inconveniencing his holiday, which suddenly felt like the saddest instinct a mother could have. On the fifth night, as I lay on the creaky motel bed, staring at the ceiling, my phone lit up with a call from a number I didn't recognize. For a moment, I wondered if it was a scammer or a wrong number. "Mrs. Hale?" a man's voice said when I answered. "My name is Mark Reynolds. I'm the attorney for a Ms. Lorraine Carter." I sat up, my heart thudding. Lorraine, my aunt. He continued in a calm, steady tone. "I'm calling regarding her estate. It's important that we meet. There's something you need to know." The motel room suddenly felt too small to hold the weight of his words, and for the first time since Christmas Eve, a spark of something. Fear, hope, I couldn't be sure, stirred inside me. 2 days after the call, I stood outside a glass building downtown, feeling wildly out of place among the polished shoes and structured coats of people rushing in and out. The wind coming off Lake Erie pushed against me, tugging at the hem of my jacket. I had barely slept the night before, replaying Mark Reynolds' voice over and over. "There's something you need to know." I didn't know whether to expect good news or another blow to absorb, but either way, I couldn't keep living in that motel room with the rattling heater and the peeling wallpaper. So I squared my shoulders and stepped inside. Mark's office was bright and orderly, the kind of place that smelled faintly of lemon cleaner and fresh paper. He stood when I walked in, offering a firm handshake and a sympathetic smile. He gestured for me to sit across from his desk, then opened a folder already waiting for me. My name was written across the top in neat black ink. "Mrs. Hale," he began, "thank you for coming in. I know this may feel unexpected." Unexpected didn't begin to cover it. I folded my hands in my lap to hide their shaking. He continued carefully. "Your aunt, Lorraine Carter, passed away 3 weeks ago. In her will, she named you as the primary heir to her estate." For a moment, I genuinely thought he had mistaken me for someone else. Lorraine and I hadn't spoken in more than 20 years. The last time I saw her, we had argued over something so trivial I can't even remember it now. But before that, there had been years when she was like a second mother to me. When she broke her hip and needed help, I had stayed with her for months, cooking meals and helping her bathe, sleeping in a creaky guest bed just to make sure she wasn't alone. "She wrote a letter," Mark said, sliding a sealed envelope toward me. "I'll let you read it in private, but she wanted to express her gratitude for the care you gave her. She regretted the distance between you." Gratitude. Regret. Words I hadn't associated with Lorraine in decades. My throat tightened as I broke the seal and unfolded the letter. Her handwriting was unmistakable, slanted, tidy. A little dramatic in the way she always carried herself. She apologized for the years we lost. She thanked me for being there when she needed someone most, and at the bottom, she wrote, "I hope what I leave behind gives you the security you deserved but never had." When I looked up, my eyes were wet. I blinked quickly, not wanting to seem fragile in front of Mark. But the combination of the motel, the homelessness, the Christmas Eve humiliation, and now this unexpected kindness crashed into me like a wave. He gave me time to steady myself before continuing. "Your aunt owned Carter and Hale Properties, a small but successful real estate company. There are several apartment buildings, a duplex, and her condo at Lakefront Towers. All of that now passes to you." I stared at him, unsure whether I'd misheard. I had never owned anything in my life beyond a car I sold years ago. The idea of buildings, plural, was almost absurd. Mark explained that Lorraine had built the business slowly over decades, investing wisely, renovating properties herself when she was younger, then hiring a management company once the portfolio grew. He assured me that the company, Lakefront Residential Management, handled day-to-day operations, so I wouldn't need to fix toilets or negotiate leases myself. My role was to approve major decisions, review finances, and sign off on updates. His tone was patient, treating me like someone capable, not like an elderly woman who had slept in a motel bed just days earlier. He arranged for me to move into Lorraine's condo that same week. The first time I stepped inside, I forgot how to breathe. The space was warm and open, sunlight pouring through floor-to-ceiling windows that framed the lake like a painting. The kitchen counters gleamed. The air smelled faintly of lavender and wood polish, a stark contrast to the damp motel room I had been enduring. For the first time in months, I felt anchored, safe, like I could finally exhale. Over the next few days, Mark set up a meeting with Lakefront Residential Management so I could understand the properties I now owned. I sat across from Sandra, the operations manager, a woman with sharp eyes and a soft voice. She walked me through the portfolios, the financial reports, the maintenance logs. I listened carefully, taking notes even though my head spun with every new piece of information. Then she pulled up the tenant roster for each building. Her cursor hovered as she scrolled, describing small details about each property. I nodded along, trying to absorb everything. And then I saw it. Maple Ridge Apartments, Unit 2B, tenant Daniel Hale and Melissa Hale. My breath hitched. I blinked hard, thinking I had imagined it, but the names didn't change. My son. my daughter-in-law, living in one of my buildings, paying rent to a company I now owned. Sandra looked up when she noticed my expression tighten. Is something wrong? Mrs. Hale? I swallowed, forcing my voice steady. No, nothing's wrong. But everything inside me had shifted. The humiliation of Christmas Eve, the cold porch, the motel bed, the coffee machine swallowing my last coins, every moment collided with the realization glowing on that screen. Without knowing it, my son had been living under the roof of the woman he pushed into the snow. And without meaning to, I was now the landlord of the people who treated me like I didn't deserve a place in their home or their lives. Daniel arrived at the downtown office the next morning looking like a man who hadn't slept. His coat was wrinkled, his hair uncombed, and his eyes darted around the reception area with unease. He didn't expect marble floors or the long hallway lined with framed photos of renovated buildings. He certainly didn't expect to see my name on the directory near the elevator. Margaret Hale, principal owner. When he spotted it, he froze, confusion washing over his face like a slow, dawning storm. "Mom?" he whispered, as if saying the word too loudly might make the truth harder to bear. I stood by the conference room door and motioned him inside. The large windows behind me glowed with winter sun, casting reflections across the polished table. He sat down hesitantly, his hands clasped together in a tight knot. I didn't sit right away. I needed those first few seconds to take in the sight of him, the son I had raised, the man who had once clung to my hand crossing streets, now shrinking under the weight of consequences he helped create. "I don't understand," he said finally. "What is this?" I took a breath, steady and deliberate. "I own Carter and Hale Properties now, Daniel, Maple Ridge included." His face drained of color. You own the building? Our building?" His voice cracked. "Why didn't you tell me?" I pulled out the folder Mark had prepared. "I only found out days ago I needed time to decide how to handle it." "Handling you," I added, softer but truthful. I needed to be sure I wasn't acting out of anger. Daniel dropped his gaze. "I'm sorry about Christmas Eve. I was trying to keep the peace. Melissa, she doesn't like when things feel out of her control. I didn't want the night to blow up even worse." "It blew up anyway," I said. "Only I was the one left outside." He flinched. His hands shook as he leaned forward. "We're drowning, Mom, the rent increase, the bills. Melissa's been yelling nonstop, and I feel like I'm failing her, the kids, everyone. I didn't know how to ask for help." "You didn't ask," I said quietly. "You chose silence. You chose someone else's comfort over my safety. You left me standing in the cold. Daniel." He pressed a hand over his eyes. "I know, and I hate myself for it." I sat across from him finally, letting the weight of the moment settle. "I'm not renewing your lease at Maple Ridge. The papers have already gone out." He nodded slowly, like a man accepting a verdict he knew he deserved. "But," I continued, "there's another apartment, 1 bedroom, quiet, affordable. I can offer it to you, just you." It took him a moment to process that. When he did, his breath hitched. "You mean without Melissa?" "Yes." He stared at the table, wrestling with a truth he'd avoided for far too long. When he raised his head, his eyes were red but steady. "I can't live like that anymore," he said, "and I can't keep hurting you." For the first time in years, I saw a flicker of the boy he used to be. He reached for my hand, tentative and trembling. "Mom, I'm ready to start over." And for the first time since Christmas Eve, the cold inside me finally began to thaw,